Morning, everybody. It's Matt Webster again. Uh, this is my third video in the Christian Journey series that I'm doing. Today's topic is God meeting you. I wanted to kind of go over, there's actually two separate points that I want to highlight. Um, the first one is realizing that God meets you way before you realize He meets you. And then there's the moment where you actually realize you're meeting God and Jesus for the first time. I want to go over the second part in this video, and then another video I'll do where God's at when He meets you. So, I wanted to emphasize like a lot of times God meets you at your lowest point, where you feel the most vulnerable, the most weak. Um, so, to kind of highlight this, I need to also give a little bit of my backstory here. So, growing up in my life, there was a lot of turmoil and stuff as a child. I grew up in a very broken household. Um, My biological father had abandoned my mother long before I was born. And then my stepdad, when he came into our lives, I wasn't even born at that point either, but he was the only dad I ever really knew. Having said that, growing up with him, he was not perfect. None of us are. I want to emphasize that. But kind of where it led me in the household that I was in was that my stepdad was kind of a jerk to my mom, and it kind of put my mom through a lot and broke her down, um, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And I grew up with a really bad example of what a man in his household should be. Um, my dad led through what we would call like an iron fist mentality, which is don't do anything unless I tell you to do it. You're going to do this because this is what I think mentality. Now, part of that also was how he treated women and stuff. So he also wasn't faithful to my mother. And where this goes with my own personal journey is that I kind of didn't have an example of what good masculinity would be, so to speak. I know people like talking about toxic masculinity, and I don't want to get into that because I have my own personal viewpoints on that, and they're not what people would probably assume. Having said that, though, watching what he was doing to my mom and the cheating and the mental manipulation, things like that. It kind of forced me into a situation where I didn't want to be anything like him, but it also, because of how he was, I had a lot of lack of self worth. And it kind of led me into some dark places. Um, a fact about myself is that I've always wanted to be someone who was married and had kids. Part of that is that I have a really strong desire to not be like my stepdad or my biological father. In fact, I genuinely want to be the difference. And when I have my kids, I want to raise them, one, God led. The other part of it is I want them to be able to grow up knowing that they had a father that loved them. And having said that, I'm sure my stepdad does love me to some degree. I just don't think that he truly fully ever knew how to love anyone because he still doesn't love himself, which is an important topic for another video because it takes a lot to figure out how to learn yourself if you're not really understanding what that really means. Now, having said that, it got to a point in my own life where I didn't value myself enough, and a lot of the journey that I was on, like, I would sit there and tell myself, I can just wait, I can just wait, I can just wait. And the problem was because I didn't have God in my life, I didn't know what I was really waiting for. Um, or it's not that I didn't have God in my life, I just wasn't wanting to admit to it, so to speak. Like, I always knew God was there, and I kind of had just put it on the back burner, and it was like it wasn't this important thing that I thought I initially needed. Um, I guess you can call it closet Christianity, so to speak. Like, because of how my household was and how broken it was, because my mom had gone away from God. My brother's not with God yet. Um, my dad's not with God yet. It got to a point where I wound up in some places that men should not be. Um, I had tried dating girls who just did not genuinely care. And it led me to a lot of people pleasing, a lot of trying to be Mr. Perfect and trying not to be what my dad was, instead of just trying to be the best representation of what I needed to be, what I needed to be for myself, and what I needed to be for God. And I kind of wound up going down a path where I had paid for sex and love, and um, I kind of like to emphasize the level of broken that you have to be to wind up in one of those places is not always the easiest thing to talk about. It's not that I wanted validation from a woman. I just genuinely wanted intimacy in my life. And the thing was is that it wasn't even until November of this last year that I even realized how deep love is and what love really is. And it took me loving someone who didn't love themselves. And the craziest thing about that journey is that I thought I'd given up on the whole wanting to date and not wanting to be with anybody because I just was like, maybe there's really not anyone out there. And in a way, I kind of hit rock bottom. I kept trying to date girls who just genuinely did not care. And then after doing some fasting to like kind of start getting myself into shape before I had fully gotten into a better shape like what I am now. I mean, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I am way better than I was a year or two ago. And having said that, it kind of started with a fast, and like at the time I didn't realize it was God talking to me the night that it happened. But I'd seen this girl's profile on Instagram at one of our local strip clubs. And I'd went in there, and because I kept getting this feeling like in my gut like I was going to not go. And then out of nowhere I was like, I don't know, maybe I will go. And this probably makes no sense because it seems like the opposite of what God would want, but bear with me because there's an explanation to this. So, as I'm driving there, I turn around to go back to this club. I decided to go and meet this girl. And when I get there, I'm surprised she's like right there in the front. Um, one of the most outgoing people I think I've ever met, but also one of the most introverted people I've ever met, which kind of seems like a contradiction. And I'd realized that looking back at it now, it's almost exactly how I was, where it's like I'm very introverted, like with thoughts, but I'm very outgoing with what I would like people to perceive. And I've gotten to a point where I'm not exactly like that. And I'm trying to be exactly who I'm supposed to be. And that's a topic for another story, another video. Now, having said that, over the course of weeks and going and talking to her and realizing that there was something more to what was going on, not realizing at the moment that God had sent me to talk. I was sitting there with her and her one friend one night. She invited her friend over, and they're going back and forth, and I'm just sitting there listening. And conversations we had before were like about aliens, things like that. It was things that would interest me, and they were key topic points and things that people had made fun of her for liking because of being a girl, which I thought was kind of hilarious because I got made fun of this stuff for being a guy, and probably just because I was around the wrong people, different beliefs, different thought processes than most people. Um, Her friend had brought up this idea. They were sitting there talking about religion, and she's talking about forgiveness, and it kind of drew my attention because I was sitting there like listening and trying to hear what her friend was saying. And she was talking about giving forgiveness not for their sake but for hers because it sets you free. And she was talking about not being ready. And then she was talking about the need for prayer and need to have God in your life. And around this time, I was also realizing that I started to like this girl a lot. And I wasn't going over there for the reasons a lot of men were going over there. I actually was going over because there was something about her that I liked I couldn't explain. And to be honest, over time I got to a point where I just really did not like the club, and I really don't like the club at this point. Having said that, I had needed to hear that I needed to go to church and stuff, and that I needed to build a relationship with God. And it wasn't something at the time that I really understood why. And that's when it had hit me to go to church. And I'd talked to some friends that were going to church, and wound up like breaking down and telling them everything. I was like completely honest and told them about my past and told them about what was going on in here. And a lot of it stems from that single moment of having met her. And another real reason why I had started going to church was because I realized that if I ever wanted to be the kind of man that someone would need and someone could rely on, I needed God in my life. And that I needed to change my life for the better. Now, having said that, I only realize now, being more Christian, that that desire is something that God puts in you. It's a matter of walking forward with it. And the thing is like I was at my lowest point in life. I was frustrated with family. I was angry with my work. Uh, I'd wanted a relationship. I want to have a family and children. And part of that was is that I wasn't letting God in to help fix the problems. And there's a whole list of topics I could go over for a multitude of different videos to kind of cover these subjects. But when you start going to church and you start talking to God, one of the biggest things I've learned is that you have to be very open and honest with God about what's in your heart. He already knows, but you have to kind of say it to Him yourself because that's what God wants. He doesn't want you to be hiding it from yourself, essentially, because He already knows. He just wants you to say it out loud to Him. And it's not always easy. And I think that's the true marker of what Christianity really is that it's not going to be easy. And a lot of times you're going to struggle and there's going to be a lot of pain. But if you're willing to go through the process, things can change and get better. Anyways, I want to just emphasize that one of the big things that I would take away too is that, especially if you're trying to start, don't focus on trying to do things completely right all the way. There's going to be a lot of stumbling. I stumble still. And when I realize those mistakes, that's when I try to go back to God and I try to figure out how to do it better and improve upon it. And maybe you don't get 50% of the way where you want, you only get 30. Even if the next time you only get 35%, you just keep working at it. It's a process. Anyways, I hope this video finds some of you well. Best of luck and good seeing you next time.